So, during the campus unrest during the Vietnam War, a small group of students got together and decided to build their own houses on the UC Davis campus. Now, what is the probability that this group of students would follow through and go to the regents multiple times and finally get a loan for $110,000, $600,000 in today's money, the use of 3 acres, and approval to build their own houses? And what is the probability that a slightly larger group of students, about 30, of whom I was one, some people called us hippies, would actually build these domes, 14 domes, housing 2 students each on the UC Davis campus? And then what is the probability that a project that was only supposed to last for 10 years is now well into its 5th decade, nurtured by the students of successive generations who've lived there, and created a hub for the counterculture in Davis and a place for the students to demonstrate eco-sustainability and self-governance? Well, all of these things are very improbable. I participated in building the domes. I would like to talk to you about building the domes and what I learned about improbable projects in this life lesson. So here I am at the top of the ladder, age 20, it's 1972. Hooking up this first dome, and we're going to roll it on the ground. This turned out to be a disaster. But sometimes you learn the most in a crisis. I'll explain more about this in a bit. So the first thing we had to do was decide what kind of domes we were going to build, whether we were going to build frames of a special type. For example, this is a geodesic dome that we actually built as a shade structure. And it's an approximation of a dome using straight lines. It was invented by Buckminster Fuller. But we decided to use spherical domes and use them because we could take full advantage of the materials that we were using, which were fiberglass and foam. Now, our design was fairly simple. We wanted to keep it so. What we had was basically the dome itself. We had a sleeping loft. We had a core unit wall, which had a bathroom on one side and a kitchen on the other, and it had all of the hookups for the water, sewer, and power coming off one end of the wall. And then finally we had a concrete pad, and this concrete pad was basically the floor and the foundation. So these domes were 24 feet across and 14 feet high on the inside. So the concrete pouring went fairly well, and one of the things that we did right was we didn't put any penetrations through the floor. Everything came off the edge, which I will explain in a bit and show you an example of. But here I am with my fellow students and one advisor, that fellow with the red bandana on, worked for the concrete company. He showed us how to do it. One of the things we also did right was we used reusable forms. And so we could set these up, do a pour, wait for the concrete to cure, and then take the forms off and relocate them and do another pour. By the way, that's Abby Dunn, who was one of the students. She's 18 years old there. She was a brilliant student. She started UC Davis at age 15, graduated before she was 20, is now a lawyer and an advocate for the dyslexic. Now here's the pad, and you see that little notch in the foreground. That's where all of the utilities come off the edge of the pad, the sewer, the water, and the power. Now, how do you build 14 kitchens and 14 bathrooms with unskilled labor? With very few, only one advisor on the site all the time. So what we did was we used a technique that the contractor that we hired to work with us, he was a crazy guy to work with 30 students. What we did was we built core units, and these core units basically could all be built in the same place We could build 5 or 6 at a time so the tasks could be repeated. And we did it with student labor. We did have one electrical engineering student among our midst, Dan Goff, now retired, who's quite adept at electrical work and hooking up the breaker boxes. So that worked out well. We were really glad to have him. And then we carried the core units over and put them on the pads. So the first time we tried this, of course, we were kind of naive, and we all said, well, we could do this. We'll just get 20 students, and we'll try to pick one up, and we'll move it over there. But that didn't work out too good. We did move it, but it was tough. So we did rent a forklift, and it turned out that Jim Childs driving the forklift there, one of our fellow students who studied acting here at Davis, now an IT guy, he was really good at driving a forklift. He'd learned that in a job in his previous summers. Now here's the core unit sitting on the pad. You see the bathroom side. There's the sink. There's a wall-mounted toilet. And then there's a shower. And then that round thing in the wall above the toilet is actually the water heater. And all of the connections come off the end of the core unit wall and through that notch. This is a very good technique that can be used anywhere for building low-income housing. It really steps up the process. So you see there the sewer, the water, and the power coming in, and that little notch there will be filled up with concrete. Now, one of the things that we did wrong was we started the site development work after we started the above-ground work, which meant that we had open trenches all over the place. This is really dangerous. But I'm happy to report that whole summer we never had a single accident of any consequence. And I attribute this to 2 things: dumb luck and youthful agility. I've used up all of my dumb luck, and as you can see, I'm no longer youthfully agile. So any project that I'm going to be involved in the future is going to have a better safety plan, and I recommend that. By the way, that's my roommate, Mike Cluck. Unfortunately, Mike couldn't be here today. He's playing with his grandchildren. But Mike is not quite the physical specimen he was in 1972, but I guarantee you that he's just as hairy. Now, this is the most interesting part of the project. We built this giant mold. It's 24 feet across, and it's 14 feet deep. It's got this scaffolding that has 2 feet on the outside and 1 foot at the hub, and it revolves with 2 electric motors, so it spins. So the operator, when he's spraying anything like fiberglass, can always be pointing down. You see that little Where's Waldo guy there with the knit cap on? That's yours truly. It just gives you an idea of how big this thing is. So we pointed this thing at the North Star because we wanted to get the minimum amount of sunlight in there during the period of time when we were doing the fiberglassing and the other work. And one of the things we had to do every time was we had to put a nonstick coating on the mold so that the thing would pop. And so we'd do that in the evening, and then we'd sit there on the platform looking up at the North Star, and then we'd turn the mold on. And the whole horizon would spin round and round the North Star. It was psychedelic, I'll tell you. It was 1972, but the 60s had just gotten to Davis. So we did have some flexibility with this mold. We could put the windows anywhere you wanted, anywhere the student wanted, and with these window plugs. That's Pat Hanlon in the straw hat passing me down a window plug that I'm holding with my feet and trying to get into the right position. Pat's now a construction manager in Sacramento. Now this is a really interesting idea to wrap your head around. We paint the house first. We paint the house first and then we build the house inside the paint. So basically, we put the paint down on the mold, and then we put the fiberglass on top of the paint. Very hard thing to get your head around. By the way, this is Chris Gary, who's now a structural engineer up in Chico. Now, this is the first dome getting ready to be pulled, and this turned out to be quite a disaster. We pulled it out. As I said, it flopped. It was more flexible than we thought. It dimpled. It did a lot of damage to the dome. It was a disaster, and it looked like the project was over. We were all this invested time, and it looked like the project was over. Well, what we did was we got it over, and then we went out for hamburgers. And we were sitting there watching the guy flip the hamburgers, and then one of our group, an aerospace engineer who was out of work, who was helping us, named Rod Jones, he said, "Wait a minute, I got it. Hand me a napkin. I'll sketch it. We'll flip them in the air." And just for you, I brought that 43-year-old napkin. Not really, but I do have a demo. So you pull this thing out using a crane, and then you tie a line to the top, and then you release the release line, and then you tension the active line, and voila, you flip it in the air. And you can move it over to anywhere you want and set it on the pad, like that. Preferably not over the sticker. All right, so here's us hooking up the rigging, the 3 points. Here's another shot of us hooking up the rigging. You notice that the dome is slightly popped out of the mold. That was always a tense thing, whether we're going to get that dome stuck in the mold. It was like a birthing experience every time. And here we are pulling the thing out with the 3 static lines. One of them is a release line at the top. It's been rotated 180 degrees. And here the thing with the crane is being held. The release line has been released. And now the line has been tensioned and the thing is flipped over, and you can see we're setting it right down on top of the core unit wall and the pad. Now here's another example of the same thing. See that open trench? You're looking up in the air, holding that thing, walking around, not looking at your feet. Very dangerous. So one of the technologies that we did use that was quite innovative was we sprayed the domes with polyethylene foam, which not only insulated them, but also sealed them. Now, this has become a very important technology because right now we need to save energy and we need to reduce fossil fuel consumption. One of the things we did wrong was we used some old technology, in this case, Windows 1972. These are aluminum sash windows. They're single pane. They leak air. They leak, sometimes they leak water. But what I'm most proud of is what the students that have lived there now have done. I mean, they built a community hall, a big yurt for community meals and gatherings, which really helps the community stick together. And when they lost their laundry room, they went out and they built their own laundry room on site using crowdsourcing. And they have got some using gray water reuse for irrigating their fruit trees. They grow a lot of their own food. But the thing that they did that really astounded me is about 7 years ago, there was a crisis where the university was going to shut the domes down. And they said, well, the deferred maintenance has gotten to the point where it's going to be too expensive. All these other laws are going to kick in, ADA and everything else. And so they told the students, you got to get out. The students told the university, give us a list, we'll get it done. And they got the list and they went to town. They got alumni, they got contractors, they got the community, they got volunteer help from all over, they got volunteered materials, and they got the job done. And I'm so proud of what they've done. Will this project ever happen again? I doubt it. I mean, there's so many obstacles in the way, the laws have changed. It's a different world. But the thing that I learned from this, if you want to make the improbable happen, what you need to do is you need to be patient, you need to persevere, and you need to adapt. Now, I bet there's some students out there, some young people who are talking about doing something, some great project, really improbable. The only advice I can give you, you may be one of those students. The advice I can give you is be patient, persevere, and adapt. Thank you very much.